So good afternoon and welcome to our very first ITCoP for the fall 2017 semester. And today we have with us two of our GTA and OIT grant recipients. So these are GTAs who have full teaching responsibility in their particular departments. And they're going to share with us how they're using technology to enhance student understanding, comprehension, assessment, and engagement within the classroom. So our first presenter will be Amy Hager from psychology, and we will let her begin.
Okay, great. So the project I was looking at doing with the grant, I titled it Turning Meta-Cognition into Mobile Cognition. So I'm going to go over kind of a project summary so you can get kind of the whole layout of what I was planning to do. And educational benefits of experience sampling. So experience sampling involves using a mobile phone. So that was really the first phase. I actually had everyone in class come with their smartphone and had them get registered. So there's a website called Survey Signal, and it allows you to collect data using surveys in real time. So instead of after the fact asking a student, like how much did you study for this exam, I actually used the 5 days leading up to the exam to send them texts throughout the day asking them, in the last 2 hours, have you studied? If so, what sort of material? And so I set this up for my second exam, and they answered these surveys about their studying the 5 days leading up to that exam. So we registered in class ahead of time, and then the surveys kick-started, I think, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday was the exam. So I was able to capture data on studying. My original plan was going to be 3 surveys for 7 days. It dawned on me that really, in just even 5 days, that students don't start studying for an exam 7 days out. So because each text costs about 10 cents to send, I ended up doing 4 texts a day for 5 days. So I got 20 different surveys collected. And like I said, it asked them, in the previous 2 hours, have you engaged in studying? And then from there, it asked them about how much time, what amount of that time they felt was productive. And then from there, what chapters of material they looked at. And then I gave them some strategy options, like what did you do? So did you reread your notes? Did you make an outline? Did you do the study guide? Just to kind of say what in this study session happened. I'll show here that I had it set up so there's a lot of flexibility in the program on when you want to send the surveys. So you can have them pegged. So you could send it at 10, 2, 6 exactly, or you could do intervals. So I had 4 intervals throughout 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. because I felt like those were the hours that college students were awake most. And from there, in that interval, it sends the text at random. And then also they're given a reminder text. So about 20 minutes after the first text, they're sent a reminder text, reminding them to fill out this survey. And then the way I did it to kind of build it into the class was that I gave them some flexibility because I do realize these texts came over the weekend and things. So if they got at least 3/4 of those surveys completed, they got the 20 out of 20 points for it. And what happened is if they didn't get at least half the surveys, they didn't get the points for it. So it's just incentivizing them to try and fill these out. I will say in the future that I will probably not do the random intervals. I'll probably set times, because the one thing that I did have occur is I have some students that work or in class, and they said it'd be good if we could know exactly when the survey's coming so that we could tell our boss I need to step out to fill this out right then. So I did have a few students who worked who found the surveys a little cumbersome. At the same time, I didn't want them to know when the survey was coming to be like, oh, I'll get in some study in these 10 minutes right before the survey, but at the same time, maybe that's not such a bad thing. But that was the setup of collecting the data. So it was those days before the test. It was built in their grade somewhat, and it was just asking them, have you studied? And then the last thing I did ask about was, at that moment, whether or not they answered that they had studied. If they said, no, I haven't, I still asked the same questions about how confident do you feel about the material for the test, how confused do you feel, and how anxious do you feel about this test. So every time, even if they answered no to that question, they still responded about those feelings. So I'm going to show you kind of more of the details. So the in-class procedures, what I did is first I had a screener. So it's important to collect data, make sure all your students have a smartphone. I had everyone in my class have a smartphone. It was about 74 students. I think everyone had a smartphone. The other thing is like a reliable connection and an American number. So I didn't run into any problems with that. What I did do is I set up a second study on Survey Signal that can distribute these surveys via email. So I did have a few students who were concerned about their connection, having cell phone service, and so I had them do it via email. So realize there's also an option, if you don't want to use the mobile option, to distribute these surveys timed just like that, but with email addresses. So once they did the screener on Qualtrics, you can have a Qualtrics survey end and send people to a different website. And so I had them sent to the Survey Signal website where they have a phone page. So this is all on their phone, and they register. The main thing is including the correct phone number. The other thing you should mention is I learned that lots of students do not know that we're in the Eastern time zone. So that was the other option, is you have to select the correct time zone for when you get these surveys. And they provide their phone number and an additional code they gave me, so I knew that they registered and who they were. After they register, right away, Survey Signal will send them a text saying, like, is this the correct phone number? If a student clicks on this, it verifies that it's their phone, and it will send a text letting them know you're verified. So I did run into about 2 students that had issues getting this verification text, and eventually I moved them onto the email project just to avoid any issues with their phone. I also did, after they registered, I had them finish back on Qualtrics, so you can also reroute from here back. And that Qualtrics survey, I just collected some baseline data about their learning strategies and metacognitive skills, so asking them about how they study, a lot of multiple choice questions that comes from the Motivated Strategies for Learning questionnaire, and I took the questions from that questionnaire that had to do with metacognition and learning strategies. So I got some kind of baseline data as well. The second phase then is I got everybody's data before that exam, and then after the exam, I went ahead and compiled each student's data. So a lot of research on metacognition collects things like what are students doing, and then is it benefiting them? No one ever shows the data to the students, which might be really, really helpful. So that's what I wanted to do. So I'll show you an example, but after the second exam, each student got a report card of their own data that showed them kind of their responses on how often they studied, was it productive, what strategies did they use. And then a week after that, they had a journal reflection. So after this whole experience sampling phase, they had 2 assignments that were journal reflections on Blackboard. So the first one was due a week after they saw their data. It asked them, what did you think went well to prepare for exam 2? What do you think you could have done better? And then it had them look at their data and say, you know, is this surprising to you? And then it also had them say, is there a discrepancy between your performance and where you think you should be? So for students who thought they studied a lot or were doing really well, to realize there's some sort of gap in what they thought was going to occur and then what really happened on the exam. And that third step in that journal entry was to set 3 goals for the next exam. So then we took exam 3, and after that, they got their score on that exam, and they had another reflection due, and this is where they touched back on the goals they set in their first reflection to see if they really reached them. And I mean, I was very honest about it. I was like, if you follow the instructions, you'll get the point for the reflection. The point of this isn't to make you feel guilty that you didn't reach your goals or something, just be honest about why. So they said if they did or didn't, and like the reasons why they felt they didn't. And most students I found they were pretty honest about it, on saying, you know, I did this, but I said I was going to do this, and looking back, that was a very unrealistic goal, that sort of thing. Just the process of reflecting on their learning and the strategies they're engaging in is good, so no one ever teaches students about thinking about studying. It's always like, you need to study this material, but no one's addressing, well, what are you doing to study for that? Is that working? And these journal reflections were trying to get students to engage in some metacognition about that. So here's an example of the report card, so student Jane Doe. So you will see that this student reported studying. So these totals of minutes is across all 4 surveys for that day. So this student studied for 4 out of the 5 days, and you'll see what material I highlighted. So they studied chapters 6 and 7 on Saturday for 90 minutes. I also calculated then, they reported what percentage of their study time they thought was productive. This was really eye-opening even to me. We'd get our total study time here, and then I'd calculate based off of those percentages how much of that study time they felt was actually productive. And so then students could see, wow, I'm sitting for 6 hours and I'm probably only really intaking information for 3 hours. Then I also gave them the class average of study time and productive time so they could see where they stand against other classmates. This last section here, these were the options about what they did. If they did something other than this, they could select other and provide that. Most students fell within these categories. And this is the breakdown of students in their class that use these strategies. So not per a student, but per how often these strategies were used. So percentage of time. So you can see a really big one is reading the textbook and reading class notes. I also give a study guide so students could see what they're doing and then what other students are spending time doing as well. So this is a lot of information for them to take in. At that last part, you can see they rated their mean confidence, confusion, and anxiety scores across those days. With this student, you can tell, so this student actually got more anxious as the exam approached. They felt more confusion and actually less confident as the exam approached. So dealing with their emotions as well, yeah.
Were you able to parse out to see if the confidence and anxiety inversely correlated for individual students?
I didn't look at that. The problem is there's a lot of data within data, if that makes sense, so it'd probably be a pretty in-depth multi-level model to consider. So within a student and then within a day, you'd want to correlate anxiety and for that exact time point. So, but that is something I could probably look at with this data. I would say doing this for 74 students was a bigger spring break project than I anticipated also, but it was really neat. And at the end of the semester, after exam 4, I asked for feedback on this project, so I wanted to show you guys what they thought about this, because I was kind of interested. So there's no way to do animation with these charts, I've figured out. But I do want to point out, so for the data report card, this was out of 1 to 7 scale, from disagree to strongly agree as 7. And people found the report cards interesting, and some of them found them surprising. And then the other thing, I asked at the end if they'd like if professors use smartphone technology in their courses. And a lot of students said, yeah, I'd like that. So obviously they didn't hate this project too much. They were encouraging on future prospects of that. I also asked them, like, did they feel it improved their study habits, changed the way they think about their studying. The other good thing is they felt like it took a reasonable amount of time. So the idea wasn't to bombard them with texts all day, every day about their studying. I was curious if this helped them to remember about exam 2's coming up. But at the same time, getting these texts could be somewhat anxiety-provoking. Like every time I get this text, it's like, oh man, I haven't studied for exam 2. Which also led to people agreed, like they did feel like receiving these texts increased their anxiety. I'm not able to parse out whether it was the process of responding to the text while they're studying that made the difference, or if it's the reflection, the journal reflections that made a difference. But I'm hoping that both of those pieces would have helped them engage in metacognition, just as they're studying, thinking about what they've been doing, seeing these these options on what I could be doing, that sort of thing. So this was helpful feedback. I had a few open-ended questions. So students said, I like that it showed me my study habits and it made me much more aware. I tend to think I put enough time in studying for exams, but I usually never do. Also, I love the data sheet. It surprised me a little bit. I thought the content was really interesting, as I never really considered how long and how in-depth I actually studied for the exams. The data allowed me to see where my strengths were and to think of ways I could relieve my test anxiety and improve my confidence in the material. Other things, I like that it gave me more options on how to study and see where I was lacking. And I like that it helped me organize and see how well I was doing compared to the rest of my class. So different students, I think, did take different things away from this. So some people really enjoyed seeing like, oh, other people are doing this, maybe I should spend more time on that. I will say that I feel like this project helped my students that were struggling more than it helped my students that were already doing well, possibly because they've already engaged in those metacognitive strategies and they've already considered these are study strategies that work best for me, whereas some students hadn't at all. Someone commented like, I wish you did this on the first exam so that I could have seen right away, you know, what I was doing. So that was kind of neat. The negative comments I got were basically doing the tests over the weekend or doing them at random. If they had a job, they felt pressure that their grade would be affected if they missed surveys on the job, sort of thing. So the bummer was when I gave this feedback survey, I also gave the scale to look at learning strategies specific to metacognition. But because I wanted open, free response to not be biased or feel like I'm judging them, I didn't have their names attached to this last survey, which is now looking back, I wish I had, because the issue is I don't have a connection for one student from baseline to end line. So I do have the overall class means across that scale, but I don't have specific difference scores or change for within a student. So there's a lot of variability in this data. So you can see here looking at these subscales of these different strategies, so their ability to rehearse versus elaborate, self-regulation, so planning and kind of being in control of their studying and realizing. I have the means from time 1 when they very first registered to after exam 4. The trend is that most of them improved, none of them significantly. I did do the second survey voluntarily, so I believe I have about 55 students here and maybe around like 70-something students here. And I don't have direct connection, so that's why I put a bullet point up there about I can't account for the within subject change. So if I were to redo this, I'd really want to connect that personal baseline to the later outcomes. I put the website up here if any of you guys are interested in using Survey Signal. They have a lot of documents that guide you on connecting Qualtrics and Survey Signal. So Survey Signal is the program that keeps the phone numbers and distributes the links, but your survey is hosted on Qualtrics. And so when they send the cell phone link, they click the link, it takes them to that Qualtrics platform. So the two are integrated really well. It just requires a little bit of setup time beforehand. And the only other thing that really got in the way of this project was Survey Signal is based on starting however many days from the day you register. So if I had a few students not come to the original class, they registered the next day, their survey started a day late. So unless I wanted to create a new project each new day that a student was late, they were going to miss out on surveys. So you're not able in Survey Signal to say, I want to start the signals this date for everyone. It's, I want to start the signals 3 days out from whenever they register. So that was the biggest frustration I had, was I couldn't get students on board every day they were late. They were going to miss out. Again, also that's on the student too, to an extent, but those are also students that probably really would have benefited the most from this experience, so I don't want to leave them out at the same time. So that's what I've got. Is there any questions about kind of what I did?
Did you get any major pushback from students having to supply their phone number to a non-university?
No, no, people, not at all. I'm pretty sure, I mean, I discovered like they have their own group me. I'd give one person advice and then the whole class would know the advice. So they seem to be very free about communicating, and yeah, you're right, I had no one mention that at all. I do think like this is the, as far as psychology research using experience sampling, this is the go-to program, Survey Signal. So I think it's pretty reputable and has privacy, yeah.
This is pretty amazing. And I want to learn more about this line of research, but you're doing some great stuff here. I've got a question about the anxiety. And I'm wondering, so like, in my mind, if I was seeing a question about how anxious I am, I'm thinking of it in terms of stress. And like, and that could be the fact that we see it going up as we get closer to the exam seems logical, but it's strange that it's going up as confidence is also going up, and you would think those would be inversely proportional. And I'm wondering if stress is a meta-construct where you have eustress and distress, and if you
Positive
parse
and
those
negative,
out,
yeah.
that's how motivated are you to study and prepare, and that can go up and it's a good thing, and then like how anxious, and have that be a separate thing.
Yeah, and I should point out that was one person's report card. So for that student, they got more anxious. Some students, you could see that they were anxious, studied a bunch that last day, and then they're like, now I'm not anxious. Now I'm okay. So it was different trends. But for that student to see, oh, I'm not, like when I'm not studying, some people were like, when I'm not studying, I'm not anxious. And then as soon as I have to face the material, my anxiety is now there. So kind of almost like an ignorance is bliss, like I'm ignoring the fact I have this exam. But so different people did have different trends that way. Again, if I could put this all together into bigger models, we could probably figure out what overall, for all classmates, like the anxiety looked like, sort of thing. So it was interesting. Yeah.
I like the feedback you give. To me, it's really wonderful. I haven't seen that loop closed very often, and that's one of the things that drew me to the internet. Was 50 years ago when it was invented or so. Was the ability to get feedback, and in this case, you're the author of the data, but just to see it as a student just seems really valuable. I can see that for being adopted for a lot of classes because you do a survey, but you don't see the results as a student.
Not very often. Yeah, and some of people's responses, like, I didn't know how much I was studying. Like, I was like, but you would think, like, at Meta-Cognition, you could ask a scale item later, being like, how much did you study for the exam? But it's starting to make me realize how accurate is that reporting when I'm doing it live time, people are like, oh, I'm not studying as much as I thought I was, but you were collecting the data real time. And so I was reporting, the last 2 hours I didn't study. And so that was just eye-opening for them, I think, as well.
I got here just after you started. What class is this?
This was social psychology. So I was going to bring up, so this is one of the classes I recommend right after Intro to Psych. So even though it's upper division, it's usually one of the first upper division courses they take. So it's the first time they're forced to go from memorizing a lot of content in Intro to Psych to like applying theories. So a lot of the students that can just memorize vocab words don't do as well in social psychology until they realize they have to be able to apply it to an example, which requires more than rereading your notes. So I think that the class seems to be an adjustment, and I can tell students who are already critically thinking and then those who over time realize for my exams you have to be able to go a step further. And so I was hoping Meta-Cognition would help them adjust their study strategies as we went through the class, realizing what kind of exams, what kind of studying their classmates were doing, that sort of thing. So, yeah, Ferlin, and then we'll.
So to what extent did you talk about the concept of metacognition before?
So that was tricky. So I'm a social psychologist, so to me, I don't want to taint the data too much by like talking about it. So I didn't talk, I had them answer questions. I talked about study strategies and what they're doing sort of thing. And when I talked about metacognition was later when they were doing those reflection journals. But I could probably build that into this even more if I wanted to have a class where we talk about even after that second journal reflection, like going from there. So, yeah.
I could see a lot of use for this for our first year studies programs or the
Yeah.
Student Success Center. There's some other areas you might want to consider in terms of how you actually administer it. But the overall idea of letting students be aware on the front end of how they study and where their deficiencies are. And even the fact that you provided extra strategies, I think would be an
Really
ideal
cool.
thing for any discipline. So,
Yeah.
all right,
Thanks.
we're going to transition a little bit to our next presenter.
Get
This is
on
Benson Price in
this.
Theory, Practice, and Teaching Education.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes,
I think there's
you
a.
can.
Oh. Yeah.
And we do have refreshments over here.
Okay, let me give there. This just clips on.
So,
I
for fear
have
that
it
we may
now.
not have much time to talk about this after the fact, I just want to mention that our GTA at OIT grant is for all GTAs that have teaching lines here at the university. In other words, they have full responsibility for teaching the course. And they can do research, they can do the implementation of just technology in general, as Amy's project included not only the implementation of technology, but research as well. We have different teaching tools that some students or some GAs prefer to implement in their classes, sort of like giving extra activities for the students besides the standard write a paper, present, do a PowerPoint presentation. But what other means are you using to help them engage with the content and to show that I understand this particular concept? So two groups were, or one group, but two students were unable to participate today, and that was the math recipients. And they did a couple of things with WebAssign and Blackboard, as well as using some other activities such as Kahoot, which is a quiz option, an online quizzing option. So as you are thinking about others and other students in your programs, be sure to mention our GTA OIT grant. If you as a faculty member would like to work with a student on a research project, we have an upcoming grant that would address that. You've heard about Project Write, and we've been revamping Project Write. And so that upcoming grant will address more opportunity for you as well as a graduate student to work together. All right?
How do I shift this over there?
All right, you gotta connect your,
USB?
you have your VGA connector.
There we are. Thanks. Okay. All right, so I'm a mover, so that's what I'm going to be doing. So everything is practical. That's what one of my students said in a review of the course that I gave. I am Vincent Price, representing the Department of Theory and Practice in Teacher Education. So it seems logical that a class within this department is going to be practical. It's in our name, practice. Some students in this department sometimes think that the classes they take focus so much on the theory, so it's always good to bring the practice back in there. So it's always good for my class to use tools that they can use. So instead of just saying, here's how we do things and here's how you can do it later in the future, we're actually going to have some experience with it, okay? So this is a class, Intro to Secondary School, so it's for students who would like to be future secondary school teachers, junior high, middle school, and high school teachers. So this is where they get their feet wet or go in waist deep before they go into their internship. This is where they start to figure out who they are as a teacher. And so it's important that they start to think about those types of questions. What do I bring to the classroom? What don't I bring to the classroom? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? So it's more than just reading books and reading articles. It's about understanding what you as a teacher offer to the students. So one of the core part of this course is reflection. To me, in order to be an effective teacher, you have to be a reflective teacher. So that's why you have to answer these types of questions constantly. So in the course, we do various activities to get through that reflection. So through discussions, one of the first assignments that I had the students do was using Canvas. They had to create a video letter to self. So they recorded themselves reflecting on those questions that were on the previous slide. What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? What does classroom management look like to me? And they uploaded that. And then at the end of the course, at the end of the semester, they rewatched that. And then were able to see whether or not they've changed over the course of the course. So some were able to say, yes, my view on classroom management, my view on classroom behavior definitely changed. So it brings up a different type of discussion. Another tool that we used was Today's Meet. I'm not really sure whether you're familiar with that, but it's like a Twitter feed. So the way I presented it to the class, in classrooms, sometimes you will have dominant students who are always talking, always volunteering, and then you'll have ones who are not so dominant, who are, sit back in the cut. They still have things to say, but they seem to be a bit more eager, so I'll let them. So Today's Meet is a way of getting those more quiet students to participate. So you have an iPhone or a computer or laptop, you go into the certain website on that particular page for your class. And as the discussion is going on, the students can type in questions or type in comments, and then the teacher receives those. So every student is still being actively engaged, whether it's through the spoken word or the written word. So it kind of protects the students for those who are not as out there as others. So we use that in the classroom, and then we talked about the efficiency and the effectiveness of it. It has pros and it has cons, and we discussed all of those. Did you have a question? Okay. All right.
I was just gonna say, is
Yes.
that anonymous or are they attached to like a handle?
So they can create their own username. One thing that we discussed as a potential con, when you allow the students to choose usernames, and if you present that today's Meet discussion board on the screen, then there's a chance for the students to distract one another or make fun of one another. A potential way of doing that is not having all the students access that today's Meet, but just assign it to certain students who you know have something to say but really don't want to volunteer and say it. You can even assign codes to them and save that whole discussion and apply participation points to that. We also did mini lessons. Mini lessons seems to be the most fun component of the class because it actually gets the students in the teacher position. They create their own lessons and they teach their own lessons to their peers who are pretending to be 9th grade, 10th grade, 8th grade students. And we'll go more into that, more into the mini lessons and the reflections and the swivel in the upcoming slides. For group activities, I believe that it's always nice as a teacher to have more things to do than just individual assignments. It's good to work with pairs or work with other groups because you get different perspectives. As a teacher, I know that principals will say, you need to do this, you need to have these group activities, but they rarely tell you how to do it, or they rarely show you how it's done. So I'm using this course as a platform for that. So if I'm actually introducing a different strategy, I'll explain what the strategy is, then we'll participate in the strategy as a class, and then the students will reflect upon it. Okay, if I use this in my classroom, what are some things I need to consider? Is this going to be useful for a social studies classroom? Is this going to be useful for keeping order? Are there some potential things that I need to kind of handle or to tweak? So that's the pedagogical strategy reflections. So thinking about how you can use this activity as a tool in your own classroom. Before that is a list of icebreakers. So oftentimes, the first day of school, sometimes the first week of school, teachers are constantly using icebreakers to get their students to get to know each other. Finding a good icebreaker sometimes can be difficult. So one of the first assignments that I had the students do was log on to a Google Doc for the class and then add one icebreaker that you found or that you've created. By the end of that assignment, by the end of the course, all the students had access to 20 to 30 different icebreakers. So they can go into the classroom on the first day of school with a list of icebreakers that they know work. The day after this was assigned, we came to class and we shared the icebreaker. So again, you can see it in action. So that was fun. So when I did the mini lessons, I often record them, or I record the mini lessons. And the first time I did that, I used a stationary camera. And if you know much about stationary cameras, you should know that they really don't move. So for people who like me are constantly moving back and forth, sometimes I'll be in frame, sometimes I won't be. That's a potential issue. The use of the swivel is going to aid in that. So the swivel is a device that does just what it says. It swivels. So you attach an iPad or an iPhone to it, and the teacher or the presenter wears a tracking device. And so wherever that tracking device goes, the swivel will swivel to keep that person in frame. The tracking device also has a built-in microphone in it, so it's going to focus in on that speaker's voice. So no longer do you have to worry about staying in frame when you're trying to present if you're a constant mover like I am. when I recorded the videos using a standalone or stationary camera, what I also had to do was then take the camera and download the videos to a laptop, which took time, then upload that to Blackboard, which took time. Then, well, before I did that, separate the video. It was a lot of work. With the swivel, it automatically uploads to storage, a cloud storage. So it's, as soon as you push stop, it stops recording and uploads it. And if you want, it can delete it from the iPad to clear up your memory. So it's pretty nice. And here are a few pictures of the students using it. This is the tracking device, okay, with the built-in microphone. And so it's pretty quiet. It moves very smoothly. And the students seem to like it. I did a poll survey. I had a total of 34 students who responded. Of the 34, 33, and I'll explain that one person, 33 said that using that swivel for the mini lessons was very effective. On a scale of 1 to 5, 33 said 4 or 5, highly effective. 33, those same 33 said it should definitely be repeated in the future. That one, and each one is the same person. This person felt that being recorded in general was a little bit unnatural. And so you give and take. I will say that if you're going to be a teacher in the state of Tennessee at least, you're going to have to get used to being recorded, because for the ITPA, you're going to have to record yourself. And so you got to get used to that. So that's my defense. But the students really loved it, loved the technology. Here's some feedback from them. If not for the reflections, I do not think I would have given as much thought to the deficiencies in my teaching. So after I recorded, I uploaded their video or gave them a link to the video on Canvas. Their job was to watch the video and then reflect on it. So based on what you felt, how you felt it went, and based on what you saw, what are some things, some good things, what are some things you can improve upon? Okay, and then you have to upload that or type that into Canvas and I'll read it. So they were forced to reflect on it. It was nice to look back on it and think, hey, it wasn't as awkward as it seemed in the moment. So it's a confidence builder. After a lesson, you say, oh, that was horrible. And then you look back, oh yeah, I got some skills. So it's good. So key thing here is looking back. So reflection sometimes is just limited to thinking back. But with the video, with the recording, you actually get to look back to see. You have evidence. It would have been difficult for me to really analyze my lessons straight from memory. The swivel helped to keep the focus on the students' teaching and allowed them to move around. So it's dealing with that movement element. I love the swivel. This person is very happy. I'm so happy I got to see that technology in action. I love that it follows you around. I had to film myself teaching in a different course and did not use swivel. I literally couldn't see myself in half the video because I was walking around. I also did like the reflections. I like that they are low pressure. So simply asking you to think about it. And the benefit of the swivel, the recording, is that once I have the recording, then I can rewatch the whole thing and give my feedback minute by minute. Then the student can take my feedback, look back at the video, and it's like I'm sitting right there talking to them. And so when they read my feedback, did I do that? Okay, if you said I did it. But now they have actual footage.
You mean there's software that goes with the swivel, like where your comments appear in the video?
Oh, no. Okay, so what I do, old school, I watch the video, and on a sheet of paper on the back of the lesson plan, I write my comments, and then on the next day, I give them back to them. Swivel does have something that's, you can add notes to it, but I don't think it's as useful as it should be. Yeah. Was there another question? Okay. Yeah. The video recording and reflection aspect is crucially important because you get to see yourself, your teaching from a student's perspective, something that almost never happens. So sometimes you have to do presentations or teach lessons, and once you're done, you're done. And then you just take the teacher's word for the word. but now with the recording, you actually get to see what the students are seeing, okay? When you were teaching, you felt that you were going, traveling a lot of places, but when you look at the video, you're just in one stationary place and maybe you do the back and forth rock. So that can be annoying. So that video, again, because of the fact that it tracks you, it's really going to be able to show you every aspect of that classroom. And one more quote that's going to sum up the overall practicality of the course. I've enjoyed being able to experience classroom techniques and procedures as opposed to just learning and reading about them. Things like classroom discussion tactics, student engagement, breaking the ice, collaborative activities, etc., have been methods I plan to utilize in the classroom setting as a future teacher. So there's that practicality, okay? So when it comes down to it, everything is practical, okay? So, any questions?
What's the cost of the swivel?
I do not know.
Actually, the swivel is a piece of equipment that we have at OIT,
Yeah.
and he checked that equipment out from us for the first time just to see what it would be like, and then he liked it, and it's like every semester he's coming back getting the swivel and stuff. So what's going on over there? Well, he liked that, as he explained. But anyway, the base price for the one that we had, I think ours is about almost 3 years old, is about $650, and that comes with just the one marker. But you can also get 2 or 3 markers, and so like if you had students in groups, you could put a marker in this group and a marker there, so it's sort of like a tabletop recorder.
That brings my next question up. Maybe Steve can answer, but how's that? Would the 360 cameras do the same thing? 360-degree cameras?
If the 360-degree cameras track you, yes.
Well, I don't know if
But
track
they don't
you.
pick up sound.
That's the aspect that he's referring to. If you're actually in one of our technology-enhanced classrooms that have the more advanced cameras that actually would track you for about 10 feet or so from the podium, then you're getting that same experience. But most of our classrooms are not outfitted with those type. Haslam has a few of those, but some of our other buildings don't have that type of a classroom setting. So you pretty much, this particular device will allow you to move anywhere in the classroom. You can move into the small groups. You can move farther from the podium than normal. And as I said, we have just the one device that faculty or GTAs can check out, but we also have there's another department on campus that has about 3 or 4 devices. And whenever I think you needed more than one for one of your sessions, we were able to get a device from that department to go along with the one that we had. And we also provide a tripod so that you could either use it mounted on the tripod and it moves, or you can set it on the table.
So it sounds like you could upload this to Atlas TI or other
I'm sorry, what was that?
Could you upload this to like Atlas TI or InVivo qualitative research software? Probably could.
You could, because it's a video. So once you've got it up, you could upload it to their website.
Code it that way. Think of that question about coding it. Yeah. I had a question for you, just thinking kind of more general or overall about what you're seeing, because I'm thinking of this as a tool that's going to help you too start to see patterns. Patterns of those students' reflections. Like, what are the things that predominantly, what are some things that beginning teachers are struggling with, or what are some patterns and things that they're doing well? What are some patterns and things that then you realize, okay, I need to come in and do some reteaching on this, or this is helping me also think about what I teach next, or I'm going to change this up because obviously they need more help around presence or some other things. So if you were looking at
yes, definitely. So once they finish presenting their lessons, I take the day after to debrief, and I develop a list of the most common things that I've been noticing. A lot of times it's dealing with presence. So sometimes you have a person who's just standing in one place, or if they see a misbehavior going on, they'll quickly go over here, handle it, and then retreat back into the corners. So I try to tell them about that. And also, one of the biggest things that I've noticed is that some of them love their content so much that they forget that they have to present it in a way that other students would also like it. And I use you ever familiar with Iron Chef? The Japanese version. So in the original opening, there's the chancellor, the man who has a bell pepper, and he bites right into it, and has a little smirk on his face. Now, if I gave you a bell pepper and told you to bite it, would you enjoy it?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, one of you won't. Okay. So he clearly loves bell peppers. He clearly is enjoying those. It's just in this raw state. But if you give it to someone else, no. Usually you're going to have to cook it up some. So I was telling them, I use that metaphor that some of you, they can just give you any kind of historical fact and you're going to love it because that's what you do. You love history in its raw form. But others, some of your other students, they need to have it presented to them in a certain way. So prepare it, scaffold it so they can actually digest it. So I definitely try to pull from what I see and then give it back to them immediately after. Yeah. Yes.
I had a question. So, they upload the video, they watch it, and am I understanding that their peers also watch it again and give feedback?
Do the peers? No.
Is it like
The peers are in the midst of it, during it, and then as they're watching, they give one piece of, one thing that they did well on, and then one thing that they could improve upon. And then there's the immediate feedback from their peers.
Class. Okay.
Yes.
And is that electronic or is that?
No, just old-fashioned paper. Yeah. Any other?
One of the things he mentioned about today's meet, that's called back channeling, where you allow that chat, so to speak, if you're in an online class and students were chatting while the class was being taught. Today's meet is a back channel app that allows you to have students talking during the course. And what I would always say when faculty are using that is to just be sure to check it out because you can see it before you actually present it, to make sure the students are on task. It's kind of like when you teach it online, you may have to go in and every now and then say, we're not talking about what you're having for dinner. Stay on task.
Yeah.
Could you mention one of the collaborative activities you may have done with the students? Like these were reflective, they required a bit of assessment, they were individual, but could you mention something collaborative?
Yeah. So there's an assignment, well, it's not an assignment, it's a grouping activity called appointment clock. And so what happens is each person gets a sheet of paper, draws a circle on it, and lines where the 12, 3, 6, and 9 would go on a clock. And so the part of that, the point of that is to enable more random grouping. So, and it's also an icebreaker. So once I give the students an opportunity to do so, they'll go to a classmate, ask them their name if they don't know, and ask, are you free at 12? And the person's also free. I write your name, he writes my name, and then we go and fill the rest of the clock. From that point on, if I'm ever trying to get them to go into a group, I'll say, or a partner, I'll say, go to your 12 o'clock appointment. There's no wasted time. You check your clock, and then I'm scheduled to be partnered with him. Okay? So that's one of the collaborative or pedagogical strategy things that we did. I also had them work together to teach a teaching style or the classroom management style. So they work together, groups of 3 or 4, to present on a style to the class, and also as they're doing that, using these types of strategies to get the students engaged. So it's not a presentation, it's just another teaching lesson. And so the majority of them used Google Docs for that, and links to YouTube for videos and hooks. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? All right. Well, again, as I said, be sure to think about ways that you can engage graduate teaching assistants or associates in your department, and whether it be for research or teaching purposes. We are open. And that grant is offered every semester. So if you receive it in the fall or spring, then you're teaching. If you receive it in the fall, you're teaching spring or summer. If you receive it in the spring, you're teaching summer or fall. It's within that academic year. And the next, actually the last UTA grant for this semester, the deadline was this past Friday. So the next deadline will be for spring, and it's generally February. So that's it. Thank you all for coming. Oh, let me mention also that the final